Hey guys, welcome back to Thriving in Love podcast, the podcast that challenges the status quo so couples can thrive as their most authentic selves. I'm your host, Sana, and today I have my TikTok bestie. She is a super powerhouse woman who helps entrepreneurs scale their businesses to the next level. She is so cool. Her TikTok page is incredible. Her content is great. So if you have a chance, I'll link it below. Check it out. Go give her a follow. And Lauren, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to dive into your role today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so cool to make the connections we make on social media, specifically TikTok, because we all know that that's a whole other vibe over there, and see where
Totally.
these friendships go and how they evolve. And I'm just so excited that we connected initially on the platform. And then recently we've been vibing and connecting more. So I really appreciate you having me
Yeah.
here today.
It's been amazing seeing your evolution. Like I remember when I was first following you and I loved your content then, but this to see how much more comfortable you've gotten sharing your story and your journey and opening up your humanness for the world to see and journey with you. Like there's things that you've said on videos that have literally been exactly what I needed to hear in the moment that I needed to hear it in order for me to get through to this new level with what we're going to talk about today is these complicated relationships with our family members, how they really do impact us as adults, not only in our life, but more importantly our love lives, our relationships with our partners, or just like getting intimate with others. Because once that bond, I feel like, has been like torn in some way, shape, or form in our childhood and leading up to our adult lives, because I know it's very active for me and I'm pretty sure it's still very active for you. It just is something that I think most people don't realize how much it impacts us in our work, in our love lives, in our personal adult lives. So I'd love to dive in a little bit on how your experience has been navigating difficult family member dynamics and how
Ooh.
that affects you.
Yes, let's get into it. I'm excited to be here. And I wanted to let you know that this is actually my first time talking about these topics outside of my TikTok. So I wanted to say thank you for giving me this opportunity and this space to step into this next step for me as someone who shares about a topic that I don't think enough people are talking about.
I agree. And I think it needs to be talked about more because I know it helped me and I can only imagine it helping more people. So I love to be able to create this space for your story.
Thank you.
How has that been with you and your like if you're comfortable sharing, I know you shared a little bit on your TikTok, but I love to dive into the situation with your family. Like how is that? What is your relationship like with them? And how do you feel like it affects you in your adult relationships today?
Oof. Thank you so much for these big questions. So I had a really interesting upbringing. My mom is an immigrant from Japan. She immigrated to the U.S. when she was about 8 years old, and she has had a lot of trauma in her life. And she is such an amazing, resilient, beautiful, smart person who unfortunately did have some really, really hard things happen in her life. She got married to my dad when she was 19 years old, and then they had me about a year or so later. And so she had
Wow.
me very young. And I remember my mom, before alcohol entered her life when I was 8 years old, how she was such a good mother. She was so attentive. She was so dialed into us. She's super funny, super goofy. And then when I was 8 years old, there was a tragedy that happened in the family that triggered her to start drinking. And I remember the first time that she came home drunk. I was 8 years old, my brother was 5, and I didn't know what drunk was. But I do
Yeah.
remember there was something happening with my mom that night. My dad wasn't home that evening. And so I remember putting my brother into his room and being with her and saying to my little 8-year-old self, she's not okay. This is not okay. So I called my grandparents who lived up the street from us, and they came down and they helped manage the situation. And then my dad came home. And that night was the night that changed my life forever. My mom is an alcoholic. She goes through bouts of when she is drinking, when she's not drinking. Growing up in that situation was very, very hard because it wasn't consistent. It was like a roller coaster with her where she wouldn't be drinking and then she would drink. In my adult life, I moved out as soon as I could. I was 18. I moved across the country. I was like, I got to get away. I got to go. I can't be
Yeah.
around this. At the time, I didn't know exactly still what was going on at only, and I knew what was happening at 18, but I didn't know to the depths I know now. And since I was 18 years old, which is 20 years ago, I have only engaged with my family very limited, seeing them maybe only once or twice a year. When I do see them, I always have these like subconscious boundaries that I would put in the situation. It wasn't until the last 3 to 5 years in my, early to mid 30s that I really started to understand what was happening. And that was because I started really diving deep into my own journey and understanding what was happening with me, which allowed me to understand what was happening with them. And then it's really been the last 3 years that I've really put some hardcore boundaries with my mom. I've gone no contact with her. There's been a few family situations come up where I've had to travel back to where they live, where I have seen her, but when I have, it's been like, again, really hard boundaries, but pretty much no contact for about 3 years now. And what's fascinating is now that I've learned what I've learned and I've experienced what I've experienced, I see how much all of this impacts my romantic relationships, my friendships, obviously the relationship I have with myself, and just how really deep all of this goes
Yeah.
and how intense it can be.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. First of all, I honor your honesty and your authenticity so much. It's so beautiful to see. And you say it all with so much grace. So I can see that, like, it's not something that is when you first come to this realization that, oh, this person is toxic for me. What I see is like a lot of people, me included at first, was like, oh, fuck this person. They've ruined my life, yada, yada, right? And when, like you said, when you dive into that journey of self and you start doing that inner work and you start to see that, like, how it impacts you, your inner child, and having to have that grace and compassion for yourself, I think allows you to have so much more grace and compassion for these people that we do love. And that, I think, is the biggest misconception when I tell people I've gone no contact with my sister. And, like, I'm sure when you say that you've gone no contact with your mom, people just assume you're still in that place of like, fuck this person, they ruined my life. And everyone is always like, oh, you should think about it from her perspective. And it's like, I have. And I'm actually no contact because this is actually what's best for us in this season. Who knows? Life is long. I just want to hold space and honor you for like trying so hard. I can see from just simply with the short little thing that you just shared that you have tried for so long. From 18 up till 30, your mid 30s is when I'm sure it was so much back and forth, so much trying, so much like you don't want to go no contact. No contact is the last
The
place
last.
to go. It's not the first. So,
No,
can you share that journey a little bit? Because I think a lot of people are think that no contact is like we're just these rigid, avoidant people, and it's still the opposite.
it's so the opposite. And you go no contact because you're protecting yourself, you're protecting your peace, and also you're protecting them from causing further damage to your relationship. So when you go
Wow.
no contact with someone, it is coming from the ultimate place of love because it's easy to ride the roller coaster of someone you've had a turbulent relationship with. It's actually addicting. I
Oof.
remember
Can
when I
you
yeah,
dive deeper into that? Yes.
I remember when I was, still in it with my mom. I had gotten to the point with her before I went no contact where I knew her patterns and I knew phone call wise the times of days I could call, the day of the week that I could call, and I knew pretty much what to expect. But every now and then she'd go rogue and things would get heated, things would get bad, things would get intense. I was into it.
Yeah. It was adventurous.
Exactly.
So for
And
like free-spirited women like us, that can become addictive.
it really can. And it's a wave that you can ride with them. Like we do become addicted to the person who is addicted.
And then we
And
repeat those patterns in our adult romantic relationships.
totally. And I saw myself in those patterns and I saw myself go up and down. And I saw myself at that time not being able to regulate properly. I would go into depressions that would sometimes
Yeah.
hit me for a couple weeks, a couple
Same.
days.
Hmm.
Because I was riding that wave with her. I was riding that addiction wave with her. Even though I wasn't consuming the substances, I was addicted to her. And so once I really dialed that in, I was like, this is not safe for me and it's not safe for her. I need to
Yeah.
set the boundary. And so about 3-ish, maybe more than 3 years ago now, I set the boundary of I'll communicate with you if you have X amount of days sober. And she's only been able to achieve that a handful of times over the last years. And then, like I said, there have been some family situations where I've seen her in person, which I set some things in motion so that I was like properly surrounded by other people. I had boundaries in place, etc. And it's interesting because even when we had communications electronically or in person during the last few years, I still get that hit. I still
Yeah.
get that like, drama just happened. Now what? Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Like solve the
Mm.
problem. We got to do this. We got to, and I'm like, this isn't healthy for her. It's not healthy for me. So I would say really like the last year, I've gotten even more hard with the boundary that I've set. And it's not easy. It's not easy. It's
Can you
brutal.
talk about like the first ever time that you feel like you set a boundary? And how did that feel setting it and honoring it afterwards? Because I think that's the biggest struggle is like we try to set these boundaries, but then we don't honor our own boundaries and then we let them go because it's like you said, it's easier to stay stuck in
The pattern.
the cycle and the pattern. Yeah. So, what was the first time that you feel like you successfully set a boundary?
So I had set the no contact boundary unless she achieved a certain amount of days in sobriety 3.5 years ago. And I remember there was an article in Forbes that came out featuring me.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm in Forbes. I'm reading the article. And what's the instinct? You want to call your family. You want to celebrate, right? I wasn't able to call her. I wasn't
Yeah.
able to do that. And I remember sitting there with the phone and being like, do you hit the unblock button and message her or call her and let her know? And then I was like, what's going to happen on the other side? She could respond in this way. She could respond in the other way. And I was like, Lauren, if you do that and you open this up and it goes south, that's on you. That's a you problem.
Mm,
So I
wow.
remember not communicating about that amazing moment in my life. And that is one of the hardest times that I've kept the boundary over the last few years. And it's something that still makes me sad. It still makes me upset to have achieved something like that and not be able to share it with her. I
Mhm.
still sometimes have some anger and resentment for it. But I keep going back to what we said earlier. These boundaries are put in place so that my peace can be protected, but then also her peace can be protected.
Can you go a little deeper on that? Like, what do you mean by that? Why do you feel like you setting the boundary and keeping this distance and having this distance between you two is protecting her?
It's protecting her because it doesn't give her the opportunity to take anything out on me. I know when she says the things she says to me that are negative, she doesn't mean it and it's not actually her. It
Wow.
is the substance, it is the addiction, it's something else. It's otherworldly. And I know
Wow.
that after those interactions happen, she doesn't feel good about herself and it's not anything good or positive in her life. So for me to absolutely love her is by holding these boundaries because I'm not giving her the opportunity to go into that space with me.
And this is what I mean by the way you say these things unlocks so much in me. Like, I've never considered it that way before. I've never thought of it as their actions and reactions are not authentic to who they are. You're right. Like, these substances do change their authenticity. You having that realization and saying, like, hey, like, I know this isn't you. And because of that, I'm going to protect you from not needing to act or react while on the substance. If you must keep the substance in your life, then the better thing here is I just remove myself when you are on the substance.
Exactly. And one of the biggest lessons I've had in my lifetime is two things. One, when you have someone in your life who has had trauma and did not get the proper support that they needed for their mental health, and the only thing that they have as an option to numb the pain or whatever it is that's going on for them is a substance that they can obtain. For them to overcome that, it has to come from them. It doesn't matter what a doctor says. It doesn't matter what their support person says. It doesn't matter what their husband, their wife says, their kids say. It doesn't matter.
How did you come to that realization?
Ooh, because
Like,
when I
I
said
think that's the hardest part.
when I had written her a letter, and I had put the time frame in place that I would communicate her with. And I thought to the date on the calendar that I would be hearing from her after that time frame. She's not sober. I thought that as a mother, reading a letter from your daughter with the time frame in place, that you would look at that and you would say, got it. I've got to fix
Yeah.
this problem in this many days. I got it. I got to do it. I got this many days and I can talk to my daughter. And she didn't. And
I'm
that
so sorry.
was,
Yeah.
I mean, imagine that was just like every single thing in it's like my whole body felt like it was ripping apart as those time frames passed before me. And that's when I truly realized, whoa, this has nothing to do with me or what my dad says or what her parents say, what her doctors say. This is her battle. And she has to reach that point on her own and overcome it. And then the other biggest learning
Wow.
lesson in my life is how people respond or react to you has nothing to do with you. Actually, there's one other part of that. Respond, react, or not engage.
Mm.
That has nothing to do with you. It has to do with what's going on with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know when I was, now I know that in the past, when I was still communicating with my mom, when she would lash out at me, she would say whatever it is she was saying to me, that had nothing to do with me. It had to do with what's going on with her. And on the flip side, the non-engaging part, me choosing to not engage with her has to do with what's going on with me.
Mm.
Back to what we've been saying about protecting my peace, protecting what
Yeah.
I need to do. A byproduct of that is that I am protecting her peace. But ultimately, me choosing to not engage with her has to do with what's going on with me and what's best for me.
Wow. I love that you said the byproduct is her peace, but ultimately it is us protecting ourselves. And I think that in this world, it's so quote unquote selfish to do that. Like, oh, you care more about your peace than you do having a relationship with your mother or your sister or whatever. And it's
Exactly.
like, yeah. Yeah. And like, have you ever had to struggle with that? Because I think that's what I had to struggle with a lot was like owning that it's okay to be selfish. And like, I want the world to know that like being selfish is not a bad thing. And it's actually the most healing thing you can do for yourself, for the people around you. Because if you're not the one taking care of you, that means that you expect other people to take care of you. And how narcissistic is that? Of like, oh, well, I'm too lazy to take care of myself, or I'm too scared, or I'm too fearful, or I have too much guilt, too much shame in me to put myself first. So I expect that everybody else will take care of me in a way.
It's been fascinating because I have shared about this on my TikTok account, and some of the comments that I'll get is reconnect with her, do this, do that. And it's coming from that place of one, they just don't understand. They don't get it. And so I understand why they're saying that. And I'm over here like, no, that's not what's best for me right now. And it's really interesting to navigate that with family members and with people who know us like in person as
Yeah.
well. It's hard, it's not easy. They're not always going to understand, but ultimately, it's what we keep going back to is you're making this really difficult decision because you know it's what's best for you right now with where you're at on your journey with the person on the other end.
Yeah. No, thank you for that so much.
That's something we also need to remember is that when you have a loved one who's an addict or an alcoholic, the version that they are with you and maybe your other family members or close people is not the version that other people are seeing. They
Yeah,
might only see them at a party here and there, at a function, and they see,
exactly.
and maybe if they do see them intoxicated, it's like the fun drunk that they're getting at that moment.
Yes, yes, exactly.
And then we're getting different versions of them. So that also just goes back to how people respond or react to you. It doesn't have to do with you, actually. It has to do with what's going on with them and their current
Mm.
realities. And you just got to keep going back to that when you're having difficult conversations in person or online about these topics, because people will come at you when you've decided to go no contact. Again, they don't understand, they can't relate, they don't
Yeah.
know what's happening behind the scenes and what your relationship is like with the person on the other end.
Thank you so much for sharing what you do on your TikTok too, because I think that's like my issue right now. We're in this new space in this personal development world where it's not about a course and information that is going to help you. It is stories. We're heading into this new place of like, we want lived experiences. Who has gone through their own transformation and through the darkness, through hell, and found their beacon of hope and light. And then sharing that story is the beacon of hope and light for others, like you have been for me. So I think it's so incredibly important for us to be sharing these stories online. But then how do you navigate? So, like, something that my husband does is like, he's like, why are you still talking about this publicly? Why not just like move on? And it's like, well, what if my story can save one other person? Is like, I feel like is my purpose as a content creator is to just authentically share my lived experience, you know? So
Totally.
has
And
that like affected you at all in your relationships?
ooh, yes, definitely. I would say it's interesting when you do step into the place of sharing your story online. It is a big deal. There's a lot that comes with it. And there's the emotions that come up when you do share. There's the emotions that come up, of course, when you're engaging with people who are interacting with the content. There's just so much. And then the other thing is that for us, this is a constant. This is a thing that's always happening in our lives. So there's going to
Mhm.
be times where we're like, I want to talk about this more. And then there's times we
Yeah.
don't want to talk about it. And maybe like with your husband or somebody else, for example, that's like, why are you still talking about this? For them, it's not their current reality. So they don't
Yeah.
get it. But for us, it is our current reality. And we also know the power of our storytelling and how it could help just one person. So it's like, no, I want to keep talking about this because it's helping me and it's helping other people. I've had to figure out my relationship with sharing about this, especially on TikTok, because it does impact me. And I have a better bounce back rate now for when things do impact me. Like I said earlier, a few years ago, when something would come into my world that was really heavy, it could put me out for a couple weeks. Eventually, I got it down to like a couple days. Now it's like something can come into my world. I can do a quick cry, release, let it all out, and I could be back on in
Back.
5 minutes.
Wow.
So
That's
the
incredible, first of all. That's like massively inspirational and like that's so, so cool.
I also have gotten better at managing my time with this entire topic.
Mm.
So knowing that if I have a full workday ahead of me, I'm not going to go make a video on TikTok before work and get all emotional. I'm going to
Oh,
save it
yeah.
for later on. I also have gotten a better relationship with receiving information about updates with my family.
Mhm.
My dad used to send an email or send a message during the middle of his day, which was the start of my workday because of the time difference. And I would read it and then it would set me off.
Yeah.
The whole day would be messed up. And then I was like, well, Lauren, you're not being smart here. Put a boundary with the time
Yeah.
frame in which you consume what your dad has sent you.
Mm.
So just learning how
Okay,
to
can I just pause right there? Because oh my gosh, so good. Because what you just said was I need to set the boundary for myself to not read dad's messages. Not that I need to tell dad, hey, don't send me this at this time, only send me message. You know what I mean? Like that's the point of boundaries. I think right now in society, what people think a boundary is telling people, hey, this is the way to interact with me and this is the time and this is what you do. And if they break it, then you blame them for not honoring the boundary. So can you tell me how did you learn that a boundary is something that you are responsible for yourself? It's not about changing others' behaviors. It's about like what knowing what you need and how you need it and just sticking with it for yourself.
That is a really great question. So, two things come up for me when you asked me that. One of them was at some point I had thought to myself, you know what, I want to try to open up communications with my mom. And I sent her a message saying, I would like to open up communications with you. Here's the idea of what I have in regards to how we can communicate with each other. And she read it and she did not respond in a good way. And I then decided, all right, I got to go back on block. I got to block her again. Like, I got to go completely no contact because this person is so far away from even having a conversation where we could find a win-win. It went to a
Mm.
dark place. And so that was a lesson for me. And like what you were saying, it's like people think that when you set a boundary, it's like, this is what it has to be and this is what it is. Like, no, I was going in with that conversation with her saying like, hey, this is what I need. This is what I'm asking. How do you feel about it? And then it wasn't a conversation. There was no negotiating. There was no like trying to figure it out, no win-win there. So then that allowed me to identify, okay, she's over here and I'm over here. We're
Yeah.
still very, very far away from each other. So I just need to go no contact because she's in that space right now. With my dad, I learned the hard way that that boundary I have with that situation, that's on me because my communications with him are open. You know, I have said I want to hear the updates of what's going on with you, what's happening
Mm.
with my mom. I do want to know. So he's sending me the updates.
Mm.
But that doesn't
Yeah.
mean I need to read them right then and there. And I was doing
Yeah.
that for a while and it was setting me off. And then somebody was like, Lauren, you should probably not read them during the middle of the day. You should
Yeah.
read those messages at
What an
nighttime.
angel that person was.
Like you should read them at night when it's appropriate for you to be able to care for
Hmm.
yourself afterwards. So those were two learning experiences for me with boundary setting and what that looks like. And you're
So
right.
when the message pops up, doesn't it make you like flutter in your body or like just like,
Totally.
yeah,
And
like how do you navigate that and wait until
I would
nighttime?
read it again, but that goes to the thrill, that goes to the ride that I'm on and the ride that I'm
Yeah.
choosing to get off of. Because of
So
course I
true.
want to read the updates. Of course I want to know. It's like, yeah, what's the gossip? What's the chisme? What's happening? Like, I want to know. But
Hmm.
then that goes back to that place that we said earlier. It's like we're on a roller coaster ride with the person on the other end. And it's like, do we want to be on that ride? No, because it's not healthy. It's not stable for us. So it's like, all right,
Yeah.
I got to get off that ride. I can't read the messages during that.
Yeah.
When boom, when I get that adrenaline hit from the message, I gotta set the boundary with myself and read them at another
And that requires so much inner work.
so much,
Like,
so much. So much. All the
God,
time.
yeah. And like, I mean, I know that if I were to read the messages and like you're saying, I would self-sabotage the rest of my day. I would fall behind in the things that I need to do. I would just be clouded in my mindset. I wouldn't be as clear and present in like with my clients or whatever, right? Like it would affect me. But at the same time, it's so hard because it's like it's always going to be in the back of your mind. So, what are some practices? Like, what are some like tools? What are some like real tangible things that like work for you during those moments of like, I'm not going to read this right now. I'm just going to focus. Is it as easy as like, I'm just not going to do it and I'm not going to do it? Or did
It's
you
not
work up to that?
I had to work up to that because I
Okay.
remember when this first came to light about when my dad was sending me messages, I would still read them during the day,
Yeah.
like maybe an hour later, like, ooh, I want to know, I want to know. And then eventually I just had to have that hard talk with myself and say,
Yeah.
no, Lauren, you can't do this. Like, be your own adult right now
Mm.
and not participate in this. Some things that do help me, like tangible tools, is I do always go back to what I said earlier. How people respond or react to you has nothing to do with you. It has to do with what's going on with them. So
Yeah.
anytime things can like come up, happen in my world, I just go back to that and I'm like, oh, okay, you got this. Like keep moving forward because this doesn't have anything
Wow.
to do with you. It has to do with what's going on with them because you are living authentically, you are living your truth, you're doing the best that you can, Lauren, with the tools that you have. Another great tool has been ACA, Adult Children of Addicts meetings.
Mm.
We have them here where I live once a week, and I try my best to go as often as I can on a weekly basis. These meetings have been amazing for me
Wow.
to be able to go in an in-person space and read through the steps, to be able to be in a space where you can openly talk about things that you're most likely not going to talk about in front of anyone else. The stories and things that you can share in there is a space where everyone relates and understands, and you can really get into some deep stuff there. I've done online Al Anon meetings that have been really helpful as well. So when I need to get support, I can just log on to Al Anon, pick a meeting, hop into a meeting. And then, of course, breath work, stretching, getting into the physical,
Yeah.
those types of things are really helpful for me to be able
The
to
somatics.
what's coming on.
That's incredible. I think our bodies are so intuitive and just like, I don't know if you like looked up and researched, oh, what do I need in order to do this? Or was it just like intuitively like, oh, I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to go to this meeting or I'm going to try this movement. And Was it more like organic or was it research based?
I would say it was because I started sharing my story on TikTok, people started really reaching out to me with
Hmm.
support in the DMs and in the comments. And people suggested for me to go to Al-Anon meetings online. And then because I'm more open about it, I'm listening more to what people are saying around me. And I had heard at an in-person event someone say that their family member was an alcoholic. And then I reached out to the person afterwards and I was just like, hey, just wanted to let you know I'm in a similar situation. I thought that was really great today when you said that. And he was like, oh, whoa, thanks for reaching out. And then through that conversation, he let me know about the in-person meetings in the town that I live in.
Wow. This is the power of sharing our stories. And this is the power of being open because, like, you're right. Maybe it can help someone, but more importantly, it helps us. And like, you build this community where, like, if you sit in silence with your pain and your grief and your hurt, it can, one, build up inside of us, two, just like make you feel so incredibly alone. And like, I'm sure that I know I had a period where I thought I'm the only one in the world. Like, I see everybody having these incredible relationships with their family and their sisters and this and that. And I'm just like, why me? Why am I the only one? You're right. Like, as soon as I started sharing it openly on the internet with strangers, it's like you build this genuine community that doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm building a personal brand to make money, or I'm sharing my story to like monetize or whatever. It really is about the human experience, human connections, things that like are not easy or you may not even want to bring into your existing circles, like with your friends and this and that, where it's like sometimes it's just too heavy to bring into like a girls' night out or a date night with your husband, you know? Like we need these third spaces for grief, for the deeper stuff, for the places to go where it is safe, where you, like you said, it's things that you can share that you don't share anywhere else.
I mean, when I look back on my journey, it's like 8 years old was when all of this happened.
So crazy.
And back then, it's like when I was in middle school and high school, therapy was still very taboo to be a part of and to go to. I didn't start getting support for all of this until really in my mid 30s.
Wow.
I didn't start talking about this until really my late 30s. That's a long time to be holding on to all of this.
Alone.
A lot of years of shame, embarrassment, guilt, a lot of years of not having anyone to connect with on this.
Yeah.
And it is very lonely and it's very scary and it's very overwhelming. And so, by you and I getting on this podcast right now, by sharing content on our TikTok, it really is allowing other people to know that there are more of us out there. There's actually so many of us out there that are in these situations.
And accomplished women or
Mm-hmm.
men, you know? Like it doesn't need to be something that holds you back. I think that was my like story for a while where it's like, oh, because of the trauma that I have, I can't be as successful as people without this trauma, or like it's holding me back. And, you know, poor me, boohoo, victim consciousness, which I was in for so long, where it's like, oh, must be easy for you because you have supportive parents. Must be easy for you because like you don't have to deal with things that I have to deal with. You know what I mean? Like these narratives that we can get stuck in. What my most freeing moment was that I get to choose the narrative. It's like, yes, this happened, and I am a sovereign being, divine human that is completely in charge of how I navigate my time, how I set my boundaries, how I'm operating on the daily of like, what do I need in order to make sure that this isn't sabotaging my success, my happiness, my joy, my peace, my freedom. And like,
Exactly.
that's the work.
That's the work. That's the work. And when you bring up the work, it's also knowing that doing this work and what does the work look like? For anyone listening to the podcast right now, you're doing the work right now.
Yes.
By you attending an Al-Anon meeting, by you enrolling in certain programs like reading self-help,
Yes.
that's the work that's doing it. Having radical acceptance that will always be doing the work and there will always be things and stuff that come up. And then having radical responsibility for learning how to properly manage yourself is all a part of this. It's a lot easier to ignore this and push
Mm.
it down. it's a lot easier to cope with this in whatever your ways of coping are. Most likely, if you have a loved one who's an addict or an alcoholic, you're more susceptible to fall into that as well.
So
And
true.
binge shopping, binge eating, all of these different things are ways to cope with all
Yeah.
of this. So it's really knowing that when you take this role on of saying, I'm going to do the work, I'm going to figure this stuff out, finding the proper balance with all of it, because you know it's going to be a lifelong journey.
Can we dive into that balance real quick? Because there's something that we talked about on Instagram that I loved was I also hate this narrative that the work has to be this all-consuming thing, right? And I think people fall into personal development addiction as well, where it's like I'm constantly working on myself, constantly doing like buying the next course or whatever, right? But there's a comes a point in time where you need to remember to live your life too and be creative and expressive and just have fun and let that go. So how do you, because I know you're like a songwriter, you have come up with such amazing things. You're a fashion designer, like you do so much that also has nothing to do with like, the work. So how do you balance that?
At one point in time, I didn't have a balance with all of this. I went deep down the rabbit hole. And what did I do? I got addicted to the work, I got addicted to the self help. And I did go down that route. And for context, I stopped consuming alcohol 3, 4 years ago. Maybe
Good
I'll
for
have
you.
a drink here and there, but because I don't consider myself sober, but I rarely consume alcohol. It's not a part of my life. So I wanted to give that context. And with that, I fell into the doing the work and being addicted to all of this. And then I realized I had an unhealthy relationship with that. And I was like, Lauren, this is like the next thing that you're like consuming yourself with
Wow.
to
Hmm.
soothe yourself and do the work and get addicted to going to the ceremonies, getting addicted to the courses, the programs, this and that. And I really took a look at my life and the patterns that I had had, because I had gone down a time in my life where I was consuming too much alcohol. I
Hmm.
had gone down a time in my life when I was shopping too much and spending too much money and racking up credit cards, debts. I've done, and I was like, wait, this is just the next thing that you're diving into to consume yourself with. Something that I learned from the ACA meetings is that we know that shopping can be a pattern that people fall into who's, has this happening in their
Yes.
world. Learning about technology is another one. And I had gone
Wow.
down that rabbit hole too in 2021 and 2022, where I became like addicted to learning about technology.
Yeah.
So then I looked at myself and I was like, wow, Lauren, this is another thing that you're like getting addicted to, which is self
Hmm.
help. So then I had to pull myself out of that. And I had to say, what you said earlier is like, you need to just live and be a person. So now, with all of that being said, I like to take a look at different opportunities or situations that come up into my life, whether it's like programs or psilocybin ceremonies, different things like that. And before I decide to engage in something, get the ticket, sign up for the event, I really have a talk with myself and be like, do you actually need this right now? What is
Mm.
it that you're seeking support with? What's actually going on with you right now?
Damn.
And having that
That's
conversation
huge.
and analyzing, Lauren, what's really going on with you right now?
Wow.
And then be able to properly navigate it rather than just like throwing myself into things.
It sounds like you know how to sail your own ship. And I think that is the most badass superhuman thing in the world. Because I know for me, I would get lost in that turmoil and I would just be like, oh, this or that or this or that, and feel like I'm not grounded. I'm not present. I'm not in my body. I'm not one choosing my next steps. And I'm being sucked in by all these external things, but trusting that even if your initial reaction is, oh, let me sign up for this, sometimes our initial reactions, even though it may look like, oh, of course, I'm not doing anything wrong here, I'm doing this to help myself, but you take that pause before you do, it sounds like mostly anything now, where it's like, you know what, I'm going to think before I act. And that space is what I call now like the sacred space between a choice and an action.
Yes.
And that's all it is. It's so simple when you think about it, but it's the hardest fucking thing to do.
It really is hard. And I'll tell you, a big reality check for me was I live in an amazing part of the world where we have incredible facilitators. And I've only lived here for about 3 years. When I first got here, I started going to different healing ceremonies. And I looked at my bank statement and saw after a few months how much money I had spent.
Oof. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
yes, there was a lot of great things that had come through and happened, but that was like a reality check for me where I was like, Lauren, you just dove into this and it became the next thing. So that for me was a reality check. It's like, oh my God, I just spent how much money doing this?
Yeah.
Like, Lauren, get it together. And then after that was when I was like, all right, you need a better system for yourself before you say yes to things. Because you're just saying yes because, oh, it's going to help. With that, I also learned the importance of integration.
Mm.
Like you said, just living and existing.
Yeah. And creating that space between these ceremonies for that integration is also so important. Like I would do plant medicine ceremonies, like you said, I would do it like on a monthly basis. And I'm like, oh, 1 month to integrate. This is great. No, no, no. Like then I was like, I need a year break to integrate and then assess, do I really need it? Like you said, what am I searching for? And can I give it to myself first? It's so powerful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I'm glad we touched on that. I had a friend yesterday who was like, maybe you need to go to, another ceremony. And I was like, no, that has not called to me. I was like,
Mm.
what I need to do is go to the beach and hang out with my friend Tiffany
Yes.
because
Oof.
she makes me laugh.
Literally something, and that is so healing on its own. I literally on Sunday went to this ecstatic like dance thing on the beach in Venice, and it was so much more healing for me to see that without any drugs, without any alcohol, without anything. Just $30, silent headphones, like with a DJ party, and everyone is just like sober and clean and having the best time of their lives without even talking to each other. It doesn't also have to be deep, right? But it was so transformative to just be in presence with people that are there because they also are going through things, but nobody needs to also talk about it. We're dancing our freaking asses off, you know?
Finding these other ways. This kind
Yeah.
of goes back to what we were saying, like with movement. Movement's really important to me, whether
Yeah,
it's
same.
going on a 60-minute walk, going on a hike, swimming in the sea. I
Yeah.
try to do stretching and crunches on my mat every morning before I start my work day. I also do
Nice.
stretches for my hips because, I'm getting older and those hips hurt now.
Yes.
Those types of things are also very healing.
Yeah, definitely. Amazing. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for your wisdom. This has been so incredible. How can my audience find you? What do you have going on in your world? What's the best way for them to contact you?
I would love to connect on TikTok. That's my favorite platform to put out content about that. And it's my name, Lauren Turton _. So please connect with me on there and send me a DM so we can actually have a conversation. I'm always down to help and support anyone who wants to navigate the topics that we shared today.
Wow, that's so kind. Thank you again so much. And thank you guys, listeners, for tuning in. And I'll see you guys next time.